Chapter 13 Culprit. By the end of the day, Fadi knew that the world as he knew it would never be the same again. He, along with Noor and his parents, sat around their tiny television glued to the screen. Stark, horrific images flickered in the darkened room, bursts of orange, gold, black and smoky grey. "This is terrible. Just terrible," whispered Zafuna. She sat on the faded brown recliner, wrapped in her shawl. Her eyes were rooted to the majestic buildings on the screen. As flames exploded outward, the massive steel and glass structures faltered, and Zafuna closed her eyes and turned away. Noor leaned forward to flip the channel, but everywhere she clicked, there were repeated footage of a plane flying low, crashing into the second tower of the World Trade Center. "How can such solid buildings collapse?" she whispered. Gingerly, her fingers touched the screen, as if trying to feel whether it was real. "Leave it on this channel, Noorjan," said Habib. The host of CNN had assembled a panel of terrorism experts to share their theories on who could have carried out such a well-planned attack. It was nearly 10 o'clock, time for Habib to head out for the airport, but he couldn't seem to leave his seat. Zafuna's eyes snapped open. "This is a horrific deed. So many innocent people are dead." "Who did it?" Fadi wondered out loud. He leaned back against the recliner and folded his arms against his chest. Zafuna reached down and brushed his overlong bangs away from his eyes. Her eyes cleared. "Whoever did this has no value for human life, and whatever statement they are trying to make is lost by their evil actions." "Yes," said Habib, "this is an act against Allah and all of humanity, and there will be retribution." Fadi heard the darkness in his father's words, and it worried him. He reached for his mother's hand and felt her fingers tighten around his. The next day, Fadi stood with his father in a grocery shop in Little Kabul, watching long, flat sheets of freshly baked bread, nearly as tall as he was, emerge from the oven. They were fifth in line, waiting their turn to pick up bread for dinner. Fadi's nose tingled as he inhaled the pleasant smell of yeast and spices while glancing at Habib. His father's face was troubled. Habib had called Professor Sahib that morning and found out that the men they'd hired hadn't found a speck of information on Mariam or the family she'd disappeared with. $500 down the drain, thought Fadi glumly. Shrugging off the feeling of disappointment, Fadi turned around to inspect the back of the store. Usually the store hummed with noise as people chatted and laughed and exchanged jokes with the tiny white-haired owner who sat at his usual spot next to the register. Today, everything was eerily quiet. Fadi scanned the dry fruits aisle and spotted Masood, one of the two Afghan boys from his maths class. Masood stood next to a table piled with cakes and cookies. As if feeling Fadi's eyes on him, he looked up, and his eyes met Fadi's. He nodded in acknowledgement. Fadi returned the gesture. Maybe I should go and talk to him. But he couldn't. Since Habib had stepped away to pick up some canned beans, he had to save their spot in line. Reluctantly, Fadi turned his attention to a group of men huddled near the butcher's counter, dour expressions on their faces. "Did you hear the news?" muttered one. An old scar ran down the side of his face, giving his cheek an odd puckered look, like he'd swallowed a lemon. "No? What happened?" another man asked. Fadi saw his father's attention turn towards the men as he returned to join him in line. Intrigued, Fadi's ears perked up. "They're reporting that 19 terrorists were affiliated with Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda," said the scarred man. Fadi saw the woman at the head of the line turn pale. She took her bread, grabbed her little boy and hurried over to the cashier. "This is going to spell disaster for Afghanistan," said a third man. Fadi stiffened. This is not good. Osama bin Laden is in Afghanistan. Once Osama was a hero, a man in a leather jacket sighed. He helped defeat the Soviets. I know, interrupted the scarred man. We all have wounds from that war, but now Osama has turned against the United States. Well, the Taliban has offered Osama Pana, so he's not leaving Afghanistan anytime soon, said the butcher. He's right, thought Fadi. According to Pukhtunvali code of Pana or asylum, if a person asks for protection against his enemies, the person, in this case Osama, would be safeguarded at all costs. This spells big trouble, said the butcher. He handed the scarred man a packet of meat. It is not good that outside elements like Al-Qaeda are ruining Afghanistan. They are working with those villains, the Taliban, grumbled an old man with a cane. We need to get rid of them both. Fadi saw his father frown. Others in the store stopped what they were doing and looked toward the butcher. A tall man with narrowed blue eyes paused as he was exiting the door. His large hands gripped the bags, and he turned towards the men. The Taliban you are cursing are the ones who brought order to the country, he said. They are religious zealots, responded the older man. They have made Afghanistan the laughing stock of the world. Now they are working with Osama. The blue-eyed man took a step forward, his fists clenched. Once the Soviets left, the country was overrun by warlords. Do you want to return to that? 70% of Kabul was destroyed and hundreds of thousands of Afghans were killed. That includes every ethnic group. The blood of Pukhtuns, Tajiks, Hazaras and Uzbeks filled the streets. The Northern Alliance is made up of the same warlords and will bring disaster to Afghanistan. The man with the cane stiffened. While the Taliban are doing the same now. The blue-eyed man took another step forward, his lips pursed in a tight line. Brothers, stop! Shouted a voice next to Fadi. Fadi jumped, blinking in surprise. It was his father. We cannot go on fighting amongst ourselves, said Habib. His strong, deep voice rumbled through the store. Fadi cringed, wanting to dive behind the 10-pound bags of rice. All eyes in the store were on them. No one is perfect. We have all made mistakes, Pukhtuns, Tajiks and the others, continued Habib. We need to come together as Afghans now for the sake of our country. He turned to the blue-eyed man. You are right, brother. The Taliban brought order to the country when it was needed. Then he turned to the other group of men. Before the Taliban came, the Tajiks, Uzbeks and the others were destroying the country. But now the Taliban are doing the same. They are working with Osama bin Laden, who is using Afghanistan for his own agenda. He's right, muttered an old woman, her hair covered by a white scarf. She stood next to the nut bins. The men next to the butcher harumphed and walked away, while the blue-eyed man swung his bags around and left the store. There will be trouble in Afghanistan, prophesied the old woman. Then, as if nothing had happened, she went back to inspecting pistachios sold by the pound. A sense of foreboding drifted over Fadi. Things are going to get worse. I just know it.